We are pleased to present the 2012 Bradley Prize to Ed Meece.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly a humbling experience to be here tonight, particularly because of all those who previously have received this award, and of course, the colleagues that I am with here tonight. It certainly is great to be with such distinguished conservatives as Chip Mellar, Nick Eberstadt, and of course, Ed Fulner. You know, I noticed that the selection committee was very careful to have a perfect balance this evening, 2 economists and 2 lawyers. I also want to express my appreciation to those folks who gave statements about me this evening. I assured them that they could feel free to say what they wanted to, and I'm glad to say that they were not under oath. But I do really appreciate their comments. And I also want to express my appreciation to the Bradley Foundation. As you saw from the video this evening, they give tremendous support. Mike Greavy and the foundation, the staff, and the board, to the conservative movement, and to so many organizations and activities that are dedicated to liberty and constitutional government. Above everything else, I want to thank God for the blessings and the opportunities that I've been given during my lifetime. The greatest of these blessings has been my wife and my family. My wife, Ursula, who is with me here tonight, has been my life partner and best friends for now over 52 years. She's an essential teammate in whatever I've been able to accomplish, and I certainly want to thank her for all she means to me. And when I think of her being a teammate as recently as tonight, as I was trying to get into my bow tie. We have been blessed by our children, by the spouses that they have married, and by our 5 grandchildren, and we are grateful to all of them as well. I'm also indebted to so many others who've inspired, taught, and guided me over the course of a number of years. This began with my parents, the people whose love and example were a profound influence on my life. Also, they were on my wife, actually. You know, it's not every day that your wife gets along very well with her in-laws, and that was certainly the truth in our life. My mother was nothing less than a saint. Believe it or not, she and my dad raised 4 boys who had been born within a space of 5 years. And yet she always had time for church work, community activities, and helping others. My father had a distinguished career in public service, including elected office. He retired from that role and at age 74 began a second career in the business world. And then he subsequently pursued yet a third career as a volunteer in religious work. It was his example of integrity, kindness, and service to others that has been the model that I've tried to follow. I'm also grateful to many mentors, several leaders in the Army, high school and college professors, teachers, and coaches, pastors, and my bosses in the workplace. They, along with so many friends and colleagues, have been instrumental in my life and my career. I am particularly grateful to Ed Fulner and the Heritage Foundation for the privilege of being part of that great organization for over 23 years. But what became perhaps the greatest influence on my work life occurred in December of 1966. Let me back up just a moment. After graduating from college, serving on active duty in the Army, and completing law school, I entered law practice as a deputy district attorney in my native city of Oakland, California. I remember that my starting salary was $400 a month. I sometimes startle young beginning lawyers when they tell me that that's their starting, that's the fees they charge per hour. But that $400 a month enabled me to marry Ursula after what she describes as a whirlwind courtship of 11 years. I think it took that long for me to convince her that she should take a chance on me. In the district attorney's office, I was busily engaged in the work of law enforcement and trying criminal cases. So on that December afternoon in 1966, I was quite surprised to receive a phone call from the state capitol in Sacramento, California, and I was asked to come up the next week to meet the new governor of California who had just been elected. Well, now, I was enjoying the work I was doing. I was not looking for a new job. I hadn't been active in partisan politics because the district attorney's office was decidedly nonpartisan. I had never met Ronald Reagan. So my surprise continued when I got to Sacramento, and the governor-elect's transition team talked to me about becoming the legal officer on the new governor's staff. Well, enjoying what I was doing, I was undecided about making a change until I had the opportunity that day to talk personally with the governor-elect. In a half-hour private meeting, Ronald Reagan discussed his plans for California, how he wanted to strengthen law enforcement, and particularly how he wanted to restore order on the college campuses, which were just then beginning to erupt. I was so impressed by the man himself and his ideas that when he offered me a job as Legal Affairs Secretary, I accepted on the spot, and then remember driving home thinking of how I was going to explain to Ursula that we'd be moving to Sacramento. But there wasn't a doubt in my mind that this was a leader that I wanted to work for. Well, I wound up working for Ronald Reagan for the next 30 years in one way or another. There were a variety of roles, first as Legal Affairs Secretary and then Chief of Staff while he was governor. I later served as a leader of the 1980 campaign, and then as head of presidential transition, then counselor to the President in the White House, and finally as Attorney General. Even after government service, it was my honor to work with the Reagan Presidential Library as a trustee, and at the present time continuing as a trustee or member of the Board of Governors of the Reagan Ranch Project of the Young America's Foundation. I'm talking about Ronald Reagan tonight, though, not only because of his importance in my life, but because of his leadership and his influence on the modern conservative movement, and particularly on our nation and indeed on the world. You know, the conservative movement since World War II has gone through three phases. Initially, through such pioneers as Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Russell Kirk, and later Bill Buckley, it was an intellectual movement. Barry Goldwater, when he ran for president in 1964, made conservatism a political movement. And Ronald Reagan, as a successful governor and president, made it a governing movement. As our chief executive, he was a transformational leader who would move the government and the nation in the direction that had been initially set by our founders. One of the things that was distinctive about Ronald Reagan was the great study he had made of the founders of our country. He admired their concept of ordered liberty, the prudential blending of individual freedom and political order. And he was a vigorous defender of the Constitution and the rule of law. That was why he and many conservatives were greatly concerned about how judges, particularly federal judges, were engaging in something called judicial activism. This means that they were routinely substituting their own personal views, policy preferences, and political prejudices for what the Constitution and the laws enacted under it actually read. For years, too many in the legal profession, the law schools, and the judiciary were acceptant of this type of behavior and of that type of jurisprudence. Well, following the President's lead, both in his statements about the courts and in his appointment of judges, we in the Justice Department decided to challenge the legal orthodoxy of the day. It began with a speech to the American Bar Association in July of 1985. In that speech, I said that the Supreme Court in that term that had just been concluded had usurped the role of the elected branches and engaged in too much policy making rather than as acting as judges. More recently, the Chief Justice now of the United States said that the role of judges was not to decide the rules, but to follow those rules and to call balls and strikes, rather than trying to influence the outcome subjectively of the game. What they were doing with judicial activism was showing too little deference to what the Constitution itself required. And I suggested that the High Court could better serve the nation by returning to the Founders' concept of a jurisprudence of original understanding in its constitutional interpretation. Well, quite frankly, my speech probably would have quietly faded away, as many speeches to those conferences are, if Supreme Court Associate Justice William Brennan hadn't immediately attacked it. Justice Brennan vigorously defended the judicial activism that he was practicing and claimed that constitutional meaning should be changed to, in his words, cope with current problems and current needs. Well, obviously, I gratefully welcome Justice Brennan to the fight and to start the start of a great debate over the Constitution and how it should be applied. And so the fight was on. One law professor commented, quote, "There is a sense that a sea change concerning constitutional interpretation is upon us." And so it was. Today, the idea of originalism as the guide to interpreting the Constitution is recognized in almost every law school, not always agreed with, but at least recognized and acknowledged by many law professors as a valid and important part of constitutional jurisprudence. It was an idea whose time had come that judges should respect the text of the Constitution and the intent of those who had wrote it and who had ratified it. Obviously, though, there is still much work to be done. And that's why today the legal resources of the conservative movement greatly expanded even by some of those who have received this award in the past, and which now includes our work at the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, and also by freedom-based public interest law groups like the Institute of Justice. All of our efforts must be directed to preserving and protecting our Constitution and the rule of law, which is the guarantee of our liberty. Finally, let me just again express my deepest gratitude for this great honor tonight. Thank you.